Today in our studio we are joined by Barend, Leyts, former spokesperson for the President of the European Council, advisor to former Belgian Prime Minister Alexander de Croo, and now a volunteer in Ukraine with the organization Finest Volunteers. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Barend, what was the moment that made you decide to come to Ukraine as a volunteer?
Well, that's not so difficult to say. When the war started in Ukraine, I visited Bucha and Borodyanka, where the devastation was complete, and we were met with so many beautiful people who told us of the hardship, and I quickly understood that I had to do my part and not remain passive.
Do you remember your first days in Ukraine? What struck you the most or surprised you back then?
Well, actually, Sofia, I think, speaking about the European Union, we don't really know what's going on in Ukraine. We don't really understand that life goes on for people in Ukraine, not just for the soldiers at the front who are very brave, but also for people just living their lives. We only get the news in Belgium and many other EU countries when something dramatic is happening. And so we forget that Ukraine is a thriving country, it has quite a solid economy, and that people just carry on with their lives. And for me, that was the first, the first thing that struck me is that people just carry on, try to lead normal lives. Supermarkets are open, schools are open, people go to see a doctor, and just try to get on, despite the heavy bombardments and despite the Russian aggression.
You spent so many years working alongside people who make decisions and shape policy, and now it's completely different. Instead of statements and strategies, volunteer is all about real actions and real lives. That must feel very different here on the ground, right?
I call it quiet resistance. We, as humanitarian volunteers, and there are many thousands of us, we just help out. We try to move a pebble in the river and try to make your lives a little bit less complicated. We know that, now going into the fourth year of the war, and seeing the devastation all around Ukraine, it has put an enormous amount of pressure on you. And so I felt it was my duty actually to just show solidarity and do something tangible with my hands. Just go to schools, visit soldiers in hospital, make hygiene kits, weave nets, just, help out as best as I can, but do something practical.
And since you already touched this topic, I also would like to know more and to share more what you are doing in Ukraine. And can you tell us more about your main tasks? And I know that you are doing humanitarian work in a small village near Dubno in the Rivne region. And why actually you chose this particular place?
Well, actually, as I told you, I wanted to do something practical. I've been, as a spokesperson and a director of communications at the European Council, I've done many communications work, and I wanted to make a difference and wanted to basically show that, by being creative and by reaching out to children, but, to many other people in Ukraine, that we could make a difference. And so I contacted this organization, and they quickly got back to me and said, yes, we would love to have you. But again, Sofia, there are thousands of humanitarian volunteers, and it's our duty to show that you're basically not alone, that we haven't forgotten about you, and that we still care. And we do.
Your team is also, as you said, involved in restoring schools, shelters in the region, and in some interviews you also shared the experience as teaching English Ukrainian children. I would like also to know what kind of feedback do you have and do you receive from Ukrainian community? What does it mean for the locals?
Yeah, I think, from a European perspective, when you meet people in Ukraine, you don't start talking about the war. You wait for them to come to you with their story. You try to show respect, and you try to listen to what they have to say. It's been very difficult for all of you the past 4 years, and you just basically try to show that you are there and that you are in this together. But of course, I have to admit that once you cross the border, you go back to the European Union and there are no more air raids, and there is not a constant fear anymore that something will happen. And that has a life-altering impact on you. I had underestimated how difficult it is to basically be woken up every time when there's an air raid and see bombs explode. So for me, that has been very impactful. And I can only imagine what it must be like for children and what it must be like for soldiers at the front. It's just a horrendous situation. And basically, we have to help you and we have to keep it up. And that's why I came. And that's why I will keep coming back.
Yes, and since you are not based in Ukraine and you're just visiting Ukraine, I want to understand how do you feel after leaving the peaceful EU and also sharing this experience living during these air alerts in Ukraine? Is it difficult?
I will say something very controversial maybe, but when I left Ukraine, every time when I came there as a EU official, I felt in a way guilty of going back to a country which is very safe and where we have no attacks and where we can sleep soundly and where there is no Russian aggression. Okay, we have hybrid attacks, but that is not the same. So I felt in a way guilty, and I wanted to show that, by providing, for example, the medical assistance we do, or coming up with funds to restore shelters for school children, that we can make a difference for you, because don't underestimate, in public opinion here in the EU and in the Brussels bubble, Ukraine is not top of our minds anymore, or it is when we see a heavy attack taking place, but it's not the same as it was in the beginning of the war. So I want to constantly raise awareness, and I do that with my friends, my family, people I know. I write about it so that we don't forget.
Indeed, and we also sometimes see it from the Western news, this sad trend, I would say. But also we see another trend is, as you said, hybrid war, Russia's hybrid war against the EU and European countries, and also your country, Belgium, because we know
Yes.
that some, as they said, unidentified, unknown drones were flying over military bases in Belgium. Do you think Europeans really understand the real threat behind these actions of Russia?
It frightens people, and they don't understand why this is happening. Luckily, we have a solid security system, and we're in the heart of the European Union, so we're quite far from the front lines in Ukraine, so you can't compare the two. But there is only one reason why the Russians are doing this. It is basically to drain our European support, or to lower our European support to Ukraine. They want us to keep our resources to fight this hybrid threat so that we don't stand by you. So it is basically a decoy. And so that's why we have to keep a steady balance between, of course, keeping our people safe here in Belgium and in the other European member states, but also sustaining and keeping up our support to Ukraine in its fight for justice, in its fight for freedom. And I follow very closely what is happening at the front, and I have tremendous admiration for what young soldiers and older soldiers are doing at the front, how they are fighting for our democracies and for our European values.
Do you notice the gap between how the war is perceived in these high-level offices, in these high-level meetings, summits, and here on the ground in Ukraine, among just ordinary civilians, among soldiers?
There's two things I could say to that. The first one is, when I was in Kiev, for example, I witnessed a dance battle in the street with young people enjoying themselves just before an air raid or an air alarm struck. So that shows the tremendous resilience and the gusto for life Ukrainians have. On the other hand, I think basically, whenever you talk to people in Ukraine, you feel that they are fed up with this and they want this war to end, but not at all costs. They don't want to give in to the Russians what they have taken from them or what they have stolen from them by force. And if we let Russia win, bullies will always prevail, and we cannot let that happen.
I also would like to go back to your story as a volunteer, because normally you are based in this small village. And
Yes.
Because volunteer is not only about work, but also about communicating with locals. How have the locals received you? Have you faced any barriers, like language, for example?
I have to admit, Sofia, I have to sharpen my knowledge of Ukrainian. So I'm working on it. But most of the people you meet quickly address you in English. I think Ukraine is a country which, despite the war, is rapidly evolving, modernizing. What I hadn't expected, for example, is that you can pay with your iPhone in every single place, from a very small rural village to the big cities. So it is a country that is quickly adapting to new standards and new modern European values. And so in this way, I think, most of the Ukrainians I have met up until now were always very grateful, curious. They always want to know where I'm from, what I'm doing, why I'm there, why I care, but also very loving. They are very proud of their country, and I understand that, and it's very inspiring.
Was there a moment when you felt like at home in Ukraine?
Well, I have many friends now in Ukraine, and so I can crash on a sofa in a couple of houses, which is always nice. If you have friends you can relate to and talk to, actually, ask them how they are doing. After an air raid, I always ask a couple of friends, are you safe? How are you doing? What kind of impact does it have on you? Can I help? So I really feel for the people I know there and for the country at large. I came to Ukraine many times as an EU official, and there I only got the opportunity to know President Zelensky, of course, and his team, who are excellent. But I didn't get the chance to meet with ordinary Ukrainians, people that live their lives despite of the war. And so for me, this has been a very intellectually stimulating experience. And so that is also one of the reasons why I want to go back to Ukraine and want to keep up my support. We are collecting funds, we are raising funds for hospitals now as well. We have collected money to fund the restoration of shelters for school children. I think this is very important. I think this is just, it's necessary. We should all be doing this. And it's the easiest thing to do to travel to Ukraine. You take a flight to Poland, you take a bus, you cross the border, and you're in Ukraine. It's not that difficult.
Have you ever faced any challenges or difficulties in your volunteer work? If so, how have you dealt with them?
I have to admit that when I was in Dubno, or in the neighborhood of Dubno, that we had to watch out because, of course, there is a lot of military presence, and we are not used to that. And that is basically because we are not living in a country at war. So I had to get used to that, seeing soldiers in the street, checking your passport, checking you at roadblocks, checking, who you are, what your motivation is for being there. And I have no problem with that. But it is strange. And on the other hand, I also have to admit that I found it very menacing to understand that what we do as humanitarian volunteers, we basically help people, is that there are Russian sources that try to undermine our work or sabotage our work. And so we have to be very careful when it comes to that. So that as well has been a very, can I say, strange experience, yes.
So you mean that Russians even interfere in volunteer work?
Yes. So our coordinator always makes sure that we do not give away our coordinates, that we don't give away the place where we live, where we do the job, basically, pack the medical kits, pack the hygiene bags, weave the nets. She's very, very careful when it comes to that because many humanitarian projects in the past have been sabotaged by Russian spies.
Freedom, solidarity, and dignity are among the core EU values. Since you already mentioned that Ukraine is a very modern country, do you see these values coming to life here in Ukraine? And how do you envision Ukraine's future in the EU?
I have to say that I found it astounding how quickly Ukraine is adapting to European standards. And again, despite the war, because this is not an easy task. For example, the digitalization, how people transfer money, how they log in, how you get air alerts, all this digital revolution basically has taken such a drastic and rapid course that we can take an example of that. It is something which I hadn't expected. And for me, Ukraine, in this sense, has its rightful place in the European Union. There is no doubt about it. When you walk in Lviv, when you walk in Kiev, when you go to the Donbass, you are in a European country. You are seeing people living in Europe. For me, there is no doubt about it.
Barend, thank you so much for this conversation and for your support for Ukraine.
Thank you.